we left off in Exodus chapter 24, and Israel just affirmed their covenant with the Lord. And then it says, verse 4, and Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. It's interesting. There's a couple different sites, I guess a few different sites. People say where the Mount Sinai might really be. I believe there's one in Arabia. It's called Jabal el-Lawz. That it's in Saudi Arabia. And I believe that it may very well be this place. And it's interesting because even at the base of this mountain or lower down on the mountain, there's a place where it looks like you can find remnants of 12 pillars, of these pillars that are spoken even here in Exodus. But anyway, so he's built this altar. In verse 5 it says, and he sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. Wow, yes, that's the altar call, and everybody says yes, and everyone's pretty emotional about it at the time, but we'll see what happens. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant has which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all of these words. So he's taken the blood that's been sacrificed and he's sprinkled it on the people. Very significant to lead into the very next thing that happens. Verse 9, then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. This is a incredibly important, unique situation in the Bible that I don't think is mentioned a whole lot when people just talk about it. But here, these men went up and they saw the Lord. And it says, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Now, several people in the Bible have visions of this throne room where they see the Lord. What's interesting here is they are able to enter in and see the Lord after they are sprinkled with the blood. There's a significant, otherwise, it would be a bad situation. In fact, it explains that in verse 11. It says, yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel, and they beheld God, and they ate and drank. So they were able to sit in the Lord's presence and eat and drink with him because they were covered with the blood. But what I want to mention is that John saw the throne room, and he talked about, clear as crystal. Ezekiel saw the throne room. They all talk about this expansive platform area. Here's called, in the translation, my Bible says a pavement of sapphire, but it's a pavement. I think of pavement, I think of asphalt. I've been working with that myself, patching up my driveway. But pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Now that's not the pavement I'm used to, but this incredible throne room kind of place where God abides with this large space of just a flat, clear platform that just extends and extends and extends. And it's seen by these men here in Exodus, by Moses and the guys that went with him. It's seen by Ezekiel and described in a little different way, but very similar in a lot of ways in Ezekiel, and it's seen by John in the book of Revelation. So they're having this encounter where they're able to see the Lord, and they eat and drink with him. Wow, they're having fellowship. They're eating and drinking. Now the Lord, verse 12, said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. So he's spoken the law, but now he's going to give them the tablets of the law, and he's going to have it written down for him. So Moses arose with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And on verse 15 says, then Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the seventh day he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. So Moses is up in this cloud, and he's just up there for 6 days. And on the seventh day, the Lord calls to him, and it's resting on the top of what's called Mount Sinai. And he calls to him, but the Israelites looking up, it looks like a consuming fire is up on top of this mountain. He's calling it a cloud and a fire, the cloud by day and the fire by night. whatever was needed, shade in the day and heat in the night, I guess. But verse 18, and Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went up to the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So you got to picture that. He's up there, Israel's down below, they're not hearing from him. He's up on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. All they can see is there's this incredible fire up on top of this mountain, which ought to humble them a little bit or sober them up a little bit, but apparently it doesn't have enough of that effect on them. The next several chapters in Exodus just describe like what needs to be done in the tabernacle, how it needs to be built, what needs to be in there, the Ark of the Covenant, table of showbread, all of those things, the bronze altar. We have all of that stuff described, so I'm going to kind of skip along, and you need to read that. It'd be good for you to read that. But in Exodus chapter 30, we pick up here, and it's talking about the incense here. And there's one little law I want to bring up that's going to come up later in the scriptures. It says in verse 12 of chapter 30, when you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord when you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. The reason I bring this up is that there's an incident in the scriptures later on regarding David. And David numbers Israel, but he hasn't offered any sacrifices. And the people with him, kind of his cabinet, the guys that are working with him, his leaders, are trying to talk him out of it, but he's in a rage. And actually in the scriptures it says the Lord was angry against Israel, and in other places Satan rose up against Israel, and David numbered them. And and then there was this plague that broke out. Well, it's because they didn't follow the law here. There was supposed to be a sacrifice and a payment that was given anytime the people of Israel were numbered. So I just say that so when you get to that point in 2 Samuel, and I think in 1 Chronicles are the two places maybe it's mentioned, you're not wondering what in the world is going on here. You know that there was a violation that took place. So going on, we're looking at chapter 31. We get to chapter 31. Moses is finally, he's got the tablets. He's coming down from the mountain. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 32, now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So here we see the people putting pressure on Aaron to build them a god. We want someone to look at. We want something to look at. We want something tangible. We can't see God. We see this consuming fire up there, but Moses is gone. We don't know what's happened to him. Looks like he's probably got burned up on top of that mountain. And Aaron said to them, verse 2, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. And they all tore them off, all the gold rings in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. And it says he took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. Now read what it says there, because this is going to be much different than Aaron's account a little later on. And it made into a golden calf, and they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. And now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. It's interesting. He says there'll be a feast to Yahweh, but he just put this other God before them and said, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt. So we see this developing in chapter 32, and we get to verse 10. It says, now then let me alone, that God's speaking because he's seen what these people have done. And it's interesting, verse 7, let me read this. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once, for your people whom you brought up from the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. It's Moses saying, or God saying, your people to Moses. And later on we'll see in verse 11 it says, O Lord, why doth thine anger burn against thy people? So nobody's willing to take credit for these people at this point. Moses calls them God's people, God calls them Moses' people. But anyway, get to verse 10, it says, now then, let me alone, God saying, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them, and I will make you a great nation. So God makes an offer here, says, Moses, let's start all over again. I just wipe out these rebellious people that I just earlier wanted to be a holy nation for me, a nation of priests. He says, let me just wipe them out. They're just disobedient, obstinate people. Let me wipe them out. I'll start all over with you. And so that's where we're going to end this session.